Hello, welcome. We are live in the studio at KZSU 90.1 Stanford, and I'm here with Benjamin Woodford. Hello.
Oh, hello. Yes, thank you for bringing me on the air.
And I am Emily, and we are here to talk to you today about social movements.
That's right, and we are here every Friday, 3 to 4 p.m. This is the Modern Education Radio Hour right here on 90.1 KZSU Stanford, where we bring you the news, talk, and interviews and local events and just about anything we can think of to bring you. And if you have new ideas, we'd love to hear from you in the station. You can always text or call 855-723-9010. We'd love to hear from you. We have a little monitor right here in the station so we can see those texts as they come in real time. We'd love to see them.
It's always good to hear from our audience and hear their own comments, because it's nice to hear Ben and I just chat.
Oh, we do have fun, don't we?
Do.
Yeah.
But it's always good to have someone else kind of ring in and give their own perspective on what we're talking about.
That's right. I mean, although I appreciate your perspective greatly, it's not the only one in the world.
No, exactly.
There's other perspectives out there. And I think we have so many great listeners and so many wonderful community members here in the Bay Area and the South Bay and the Peninsula especially. You have great stuff to say, and we want to hear it. We will want to talk about it on the air. We want to bring it up and make it known for other people to benefit as well.
Yes.
So, Emily,
yeah,
tell me, what are we going to do today? What is our plan? What are we going to talk about?
So our plan at the moment, it sounds like, first of all, we're going to be working overtime.
Oh, we are. Yeah. Luckily, we're volunteers, yes. So nobody's going to pay us overtime, which is totally fine. Yeah. Luckily, we don't have to, bleed the budget dry for this extra long
just
show.
Coming out of our own passion.
Oh, we love this, don't we? Okay. So what we are going to do today is at least an hour, probably two, of talk radio. What will we be discussing today?
So I'm going to set the scene a bit first with France and what's going on in there.
Okay.
Over in that country,
right?
America, and and basically what's been happening over there is going to set the scene for understanding social movements in general. And trying to look at what I'm really interested in with this topic personally is how different countries protest and how their social movements evolve, and each one being in the UK, I lived there for about 4 years. I was able to go to different protests myself and kind of bounce back and forth my American perspective of protest, and as well I've attended protests here,
right?
To back to the UK, and just one of my biggest observations was just how different it was. Like, they're talking about the exact same topics. Like, it was around the time of Trump, I'm thinking of. And
the time of Trump, the era of Trumpiness.
When we were going
dirty
through,
even saying it because it makes it sound respectable.
I know it was really going to be a thing in the future. People are like the era of Trump,
the era of lost of all logic and sense.
Yeah, fake news, anything in between.
Yeah.
And what was really interesting, because they're talking about people were protesting anti-Trump in England, but the way that they did it was so differently. And of course, especially because if you're homebound in the US, you had this pretty much anger and frustration. And then you saw what was happening in the UK. People were still angry, but more shocked and really I wish I could describe the scene fully. Basically, it was a bunch of people with signs with anti-Trump, Trump's face X'd out. Everyone's just making the typical shouts. But the biggest difference, I'd say, between Britain and America is America's about free speech. And Britain's more of I'm going to make a little bit of stereotype right now.
That's okay.
But you good old jolly Brits, they're a little bit more kumbaya, sing, dance.
Okay. Stay calm and carry on kind of thing.
A little bit.
Yeah.
But they do get angry.
Keep calm and carry on. I just misquoted Winston Churchill. That's pretty bad. But.
Come on.
And I'm smoking a cigar at this moment, and it still misquoted him. I'm not actually. We don't smoke in the studio.
Well, not in the 70s, 80s anymore.
Yeah.
So also gonna weave that into as well as my understanding of French protesting and how they do in France. So to kind of map out what's been going on over there, we've seen basically a reaction to petrol or gas prices being risen and continually rising. And it overall gave this big frustration to people just because of the gas prices. And there as well, like a lot of just like human rights or minimum wage. People were saying it's not enough. It's not enough for us to just get by.
So this is the kind of backbone of what was what the protest in France is about, right?
Very shortly, but yes.
Riots,
yes.
Right?
Riots more like it at the moment.
Yeah.
So
can we still call it a protest if it's a riotous protest?
I mean, protest would be more of the chanting, all about singing.
Okay.
Riot is when there's more of that violent side where you are intentionally hurting businesses, to cars, to anything infrastructure around you. For the most part, setting fires. I mean, if you think of riot, you think of something a little bit more. Gotta go riot.
You're always our definition person. Like when we need a definition, you're like, I got this. I have defined things.
Got it.
And I will define them. And it's great because we need definitions. It's really hard to have a conversation where you don't have a common language, right?
Well, that's one of the hardest things about common language, because you can be talking about like a subject of someone. And if you don't have the same understanding to go off of, you may not even reach the same conclusion. So,
you may not even be having the same conversation.
Exactly.
Which
really
is
the same conversation.
Right. And things break down real quick. Yeah.
And really in general, protest riots, there's just so many different definitions and segmented breaks of what people understand these social movements as a whole, what they are or can be defined as. And that itself has changed over the years.
Yeah.
But going back to France, kind of also setting this up, there was a big uprising, I guess you could say, a big anger in the population because of these gas prices being raised. And at the time,
how much were they raised? Do you know?
See, I actually wish I looked that up now. But no, I'm not too sure of that incremental, how much it was. But it first started as more of like a silent protest, where around the time there was a new law passed where you had to have a yellow safety jacket in your car. And that yellow safety jacket was, now people were putting them in the front of their windowsills to kind of say, like a silent little protest, I'm against this. And then it kind of stirred into more. What was the jacket
for in the first place?
So it was first put out by the government as a government requirement for roadside safety. So typically rural France, for example, if you're on the side of the road and your car broke down, you have to have this jacket on. So then it's that reflector jacket. So
you don't get hit by a car.
Exactly.
Okay. So it was just a safety thing for roadside assistance.
Exactly.
And everybody had to have one.
Yeah.
Like a flare. Okay.
And so after that, people started wearing those yellow jackets and now rioting. And overall, there was about, in US dollars, 11.3 billion in damage.
Billion. With a B.
With a B.
It might as well be zillion, right?
Yeah. But I found what was
that's
shocking.
Actually a number, yeah.
Zillion. But what I found shocking was there was about 66% of the population who sided with the protesters.
That's more than the majority. Yeah, that's a majority for sure.
So a lot of these people were feeling that this issue needed to be addressed. And to kind of also talk about protests, riots in France in general, they are go out in the streets, stop the cars, stop the airline, the airports, make things stop to make it happen. And so that's exactly what was happening. They stopped the boats, they stopped the airlines, cars, and a couple days later, you have Macron, the French prime minister, come up and say, okay, I will freeze all of taxes for gas and electricity for 2019. And as well, since they were talking about minimum wage and quality of life, he also said, I'm going to increase the minimum wage.
Okay. That sounds like good news.
It's good news, but still, people are still pretty upset with the decision and the way things went about, as well as just the destruction of the city itself, because Paris was the most affected.
Sure. And I'm thinking, how long is it going to take for the increase in wages and
that's
and
another
gas
problem
to offset the 1.3 billion of damages that were done? I mean, that seems like it's going to take a while.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if maybe they get $1 or $2 more an hour, if that.
I mean, all of it's pretty unsure at the moment.
Their gas per gallon, and I mean, anyway, it definitely makes you think about whether or not it is the damage worth the outcome.
Well, that is its own type of argument or like ethical weighing value of this type of riot. Is it like does that outweigh the benefit that he actually did something?
Right.
Because at least for me, when I was thinking of this story, I'm like, wow, I was kind of shocked in that sense as an American as well, of like, so these people they got to an extent what they asked for.
Sure. And which is rare, I think, in the protest world, to actually get it.
It's you have to think of the scale of the country itself, because like, for example, all of these European countries, their typical ways of like understanding and protesting are so different because they're so much smaller in population.
Sure.
In America, we're so divided just because of our geography that if we have a problem, it has to be a little bit more local to be dealt with than national.
Oh, so you're saying, are you saying that a local protest probably has a better chance of succeeding than a large kind of protest in America?
Mean, I don't want to make a definite statement forever, but I would at least say that, especially what we've seen over time in the U.S., that it grew from local to national to global. And as you go every step up, it becomes more difficult to make those unified understandings of the ideology of that protest itself, as well as trying to establish and accomplish that mission.
Yeah, I have a little story that sort of fits into this framework here. So I was at lunch today with a friend of mine, and she was telling me about an experience she had in high school where one of her teachers made a really cool lesson talking about movements and propaganda and sort of ways that facts have been obscured by governments to create movements around, the Nazi Party and around internment here in America, and all these different ways that that the approach has been taken of propaganda to try to change people's thoughts, right? To change the way they think about an issue. And the next day when she came back to school, the teacher was gone. And this teacher had a PhD, was teaching in high school by choice because she really wanted to be there. And, made a very concerted effort with this sort of risque lesson to make sure it was a well-rounded, two-sided view and not just trying to tell kids something that was, maybe contradictory or not popular or whatever. And it turned out her teacher got fired.
Wow.
Yeah. And so this teacher had been gone for about a week and they didn't really know why. And they started asking, what's going on here? Where's our teacher? Where did she go? And it turns out they let her go because they didn't think that she had the right to go off the script and actually teach students real information that would, wasn't in the textbook. Which,
to go off of that too, is what I guess how old are these kids first?
High school.
High school. Yeah. Okay. So when I was in high school, remember this professor, or teacher, we kind of had this little gossip around her that she was a communist because she was I love Karl Marx.
Okay.
And
I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with communism, first of all. It hasn't been done
I'm getting
well.
There. I'm getting there. Okay.
Sure.
So that was the fundamental idea. I was communism bad, Karl Marx bad.
Sure.
I then went to college and I had this professor who loved Karl Marx.
Yeah.
And I was actually reading through his text. I was like, why was I had that almost, I want to suggest, brainwash that communism equals bad, equals evil.
Yeah.
And you don't get into that. And once I gave it a chance, I realized, man, why did I feel that way?
Yeah.
Why was I so convinced? And I think to an extent that goes back to the way that it's taught. I mean, she didn't even teach it in that full second way. The only thing was she had a Karl Marx poster in her classroom.
Sure. Yeah. And yeah, it's one of those things where we take on the opinion of other people or of, popular, what we believe is popular sentiment.
Yeah.
And I would even pretty much stretch and feel comfortable saying this. You probably had no clue what Marxism was or communism was. And it was like, you're like a high school student sitting there going, no, this is bad.
Yeah.
Why do I think that? That doesn't matter.
McCarthy isn't bad.
Right. And so, yeah, and it's such a powerful thing how we can adopt the opinions of others without ever really taking the time to understand it ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to get back to this high school story because that wasn't the end, right?
Okay, yeah.
So the reason why this story fits into our show today is because the students did not like losing their teacher. They really liked her. They thought she was great. They knew she put in more thought and effort to her lessons and to what she was giving them than most of anyone they'd ever known.
That's good.
And so they created a movement in their school, a small localized movement. They contacted the school board and the parents, and they really made a stink about it and wrote letters and got a petition signed, and the school board brought her back. And
happy story.
A short time later, she was back in the classroom, and they were all very happy. And I think part of the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it speaks to that small town, small movement efficacy, and how much you really, really can have an immediate and tangible effect on the world you actually live in. Now, if I start a movement trying to, I don't know, get reasonable funding for schools on a national level, that's going to be very tough.
It's a lot more of more barriers to overcome when you become national or global.
Right. And you have so much more red tape and bureaucracy standing in the way. And so I think this story at least speaks to a little bit of confirming your thought or your claim about how smaller movements may in fact be the easier ones to enact. And I think they're arguably very, if not more important, for the simple fact that they give us the self-belief and the efficacy once we've made change on a small level in things that actually matter in our lives. I believe that kind of experience will really empower people to be able to take on these bigger challenges, to run for government, to do lobbying, to do the kinds of things that can make change on a much bigger scale. Where does it
more
start?
Obtainable.
Right. You believe it's possible because you've seen something like that. And I think that's a stepping stone that it should not be overlooked in the goal. If your goal is to make the world a better place, understanding that I think could be a really powerful piece of the puzzle.
And they always say, start small, then go big.
Exactly.
I don't know, starting with yourself to your own local community, branching. It just can go off into so many different layers. But I think it's what you're saying is exactly a really good point of starting locally, kind of harvest that idea already.
Sure.
And then I'm even thinking maybe can even bring off a domino effect when you're starting that local, maybe, I don't know, you're socializing a whole group of people in that way.
And it can start a movement, right? Yeah. Every movement, arguably, unless it was an engineered movement, and there have been those where the movement has sort of been, they call it, what do they call it? They call it astroturfing, I believe is the term. So astroturfing is when you're creating a fake grassroots movement. And it's happened enough times now, especially with all the digital technology that we use so much, that there's a name for it. I believe that's the name. I hope I'm not misquoting here. But it's an interesting way to think about it, right? There are actual, think tanks and advertising agencies that create false grassroots movements to make it appear as if it had organically grown from people's actual interests. And there are even, political action committees and companies that put together commercials and political advertisements that try to play themselves off as a community affecting change because it's more compelling, it's more believable. It gives us a social validation that this is a topic people actually care about, when in reality it's only being portrayed that way.
That's a good point. You're making me, because during my reading, I was looking at the academic Doug McAdams, which I believe he is a professor here.
Oh.
I have a feeling.
Okay.
And basically, he was looking at the summer of, I'm not going to remember, 1968. I'm going to say.
All right. Google it if it's wrong. We don't have no apologies.
It was called the Freedom Camp in Mississippi. And it was during, basically a bunch of volunteers came together and they went out in Mississippi to register Black voters and try to get people to get in and increase the voting population there. And he was looking at the studies of people, like what type of people volunteered, like what ties did they have. And he kind of, when he was looking at this, that the people who actually followed through the most were people who were already associated with an organization, or at least knew someone who was in a similar type of activist mentality.
Yeah.
So as well, like just the influence of activism usually, or the persistence of activism, is the exposure, to say that like you are at least somewhat familiar with the idea. And so it's kind of like going back to that grassroots of the idea where it's like, to be persuaded by activism, there needs to be that like understanding, or like knowing where these organizations are, knowing of a friend who's an activist. I don't know how to
a social network.
Exactly.
Right.
That's the word I'm looking for.
So I actually had a guest on the show here a few months back, and you can listen to the recording online if you're interested. Thomas Valente, and he's a social network researcher. And it turns out there are some very interesting dynamics within these social networks that allow us to, be influenced to do things that we may not have done, or that we may not have ever known about. And it turns out our friends, our family, our weak ties, even the people who we kind of know in passing or know cordially, but maybe don't spend holidays with, these people have a big influence on our actions. We've all had that friend that's like, oh, come check out this thing. I really love it. It's great. And we're like, no. And then they tell us a few more times, we're like, fine, if you'll stop bugging me, I'll go. Yeah. And then you get there and you love it, or, you're super interested, or you end up exposed to something that was great that you really become passionate about. But it always has to start with kind of planting that seed, right?
Exactly. And I think it's even more, like you see it even more on that bigger scale now because of the internet. Because it doesn't even necessarily have to be immediately there presently with you. It could be on the internet, someone talking about it online, and you're looking into these things. I'm thinking of one example in Saudi Arabia where women were granted the right to drive. Yeah. And that was basically social media activism, where these people, like organizations, I believe the UN had some campaigns around that too. Yeah. And they basically kept pushing the government, and it became such a thing where the people were now pushing the government even more, that it became that change. Yeah. So it was interesting for you to mention that way. Yeah.
It's a funny thing because everybody should have the right to drive, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I'm not the final say on any of that, but driving is one of the most dangerous things you ever do, right? It's like fighting for the chance to up your mortality rate highly, which is kind of funny. I'm not speaking down on it at all, but it's just one of those things where you go,
something could happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's good, right? Let's keep it going. It actually reminds me of a story. Okay. So
story time.
Yeah. So this reporter, and I don't know the names, so I'm just going to make it very general and not say the names, but this reporter went to the Middle East after, a 10-year stint where they had been there previously, right? And when they had been there previously, they had seen the women following their men behind, right? They would be like 10 paces behind them and walking behind them. And this was very much a power dynamic. Yeah. The men were in charge, the women were following, and that was the social dynamic, right? Now, the women had been liberated in this last 10 years since the reporter had visited, and the reporter came back and saw that the women were still following the men. Now, not 10 steps behind, but 20.
Really?
And the reporter's like, well, what's going on here?
Interesting.
You've won your rights. You've you've gotten so much more freedom. Why are you still following? Mm-hmm. And the woman he was speaking to looked at him and said, landmines.
What do you go on?
Because the men are in front to make sure if anyone steps on the landmine, it's them. So even though the women were empowered now and had a little more freedom and choice, they still chose this, and it was very strategic. Let the men die from the landmines. That's smart, right?
I really like that.
Yeah,
landmines.
It's great, right? Because let's be real. I mean, we want to be equals, but we also don't want to die.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's fair.
Fair point.
Yeah.
That's why when a guy, if he's like, I want to stand on the side of the side, like by the cars on the sidewalk. I'm like, at first I'm like, well, like why?
Like he's going to protect you from a moving car, right?
And then I saw this video once, and it was a crazy video. This car goes, the guy was on the side, and this car goes onto the sidewalk, and he like grabs his girl, I'm assuming maybe friend, and pulls her to the side like last second. And it was amazing. And
so now you're convinced?
I wasn't at least convinced, but I'm like, man, I'll just, you take that side. You can take it if you want. But I think...
Okay. I see where you're going here. It's like the utility, right? Like, you step on the landmine. I love you, but not that much, right?
I love you anyways. Thank you.
Right. I think that's wonderful. Yeah. I mean, and I think this brings up an interesting point, just the difference, and I'm getting way off topic here, but we got 2 hours, so I might as well. The difference between chauvinistic ideals that are not necessarily nice or kind and actually doing something that has a utility, right? I mean, I use a wheelchair. People open doors for me a lot. Maybe not as much as I'd like, those jerks. But no, for real, it's like, I'm happy when someone opens a door for me. I can open the door myself. I do it all the time, right? I'm not like trapped in my apartment as soon as I go home. But the fact that people do it, even if I don't need it, it's a nice gesture, right? It's something that people can do that seems kind and feels thoughtful. And, it's not that meaningful. It doesn't make a big deal. It doesn't noticeably improve or diminish anyone's life. And I always just sort of wonder, and I don't have an answer to this, but, where is the line between doing kind things to be thoughtful, such as walking on the outside so you can shove your loved one into the grass as you get run over, or as your dying wish is like saving someone.
He saved both, okay?
Okay, well, I'm just saying, like, you could conceive of a situation where that actually is like the life-saving move, and whoever was on the outside is the one that gets it. And whatever, I mean, I don't know, but like, where's the line, right?
I don't even know if I can say.
Yeah. Well, you're the only one allowed to say, because I'm a man, so I can't say. I can't have a line.
I mean, I would at least say, because, as soon as it becomes like you're making it seem like I am too weak to be able to do it myself, that becomes a problem. Or like I'm doing it because I'm a man.
But what about like when I open up a jar of pickles? Like,
well, if I ask you to open the jar of pickles, but if you open the jar of pickles and go, see, that's why you needed me to open it, I'd be like, but I probably could have opened it myself. I do have
strong hands. It's not like you needed me for that. Anyway, I don't open pickles for you that often, but this actually happened the other night. I was sitting with a female friend, and she was trying to open a container.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'll open it. And she's like, no, I got it. And then she couldn't open it and handed it over, and I opened it. Well, and I'm like, was that pride stopping her from allowing me? Was that me being chauvinistic by offering? Where's the line? I don't know.
Just let us figure out first that we couldn't open it, and then we'll just please open it for us.
But I want to be helpful too. It's like I'm literally sitting there doing nothing. Like, hey, I could open that. Like, finish other things and let me open the pickles, so I at least feel like I have like a purpose in life, right?
Your purpose is opening pickle jars.
I mean, there's worse things, right? I mean, what if I can't open pickle jars? I mean, then I have no purpose at all.
That's a problem for me. You can't open pickle jars.
Seriously. No, but you don't need a man for that. You need someone who can open pickle jars. That's not a man role, right?
Like men are typically stronger, so
maybe I don't know. I mean, I've met some really strong women and some really weak men, and it's more like typically is the operative word there, right?
Yeah.
Because the reality is nobody's typical in the first place. What is typical anyway? It's so typical of you to say that.
Oh, typical. Well.
We've gotten way off of
I
protest.
definitely
Are you
think
going to
we have.
protest this tangent?
Protest.
Do you think we should occupy the airwaves with some more protest talk? Or maybe all DJ lives matter, right? Let's get back to this. You want to do radio again? Me too.
Okay, and we're back.
I don't think Emily got half of my protest puns there, but
okay, I got them. I'm getting them. I'm like 5 seconds slower. Oh, I got it. I'm just kidding.
Oh, it is so much fun working together in the studio here at KZSU. What do you say we play a little music and we'll come right back after we regroup?
This portion of the radio show was deleted due to copyright reasons, but you can tune in to KZSU 90.1 every Friday from 3 to 4.
And we are back on the air here at 90.1 KZSU Stanford with a radio hour for modern education. We're here Fridays at 3. Well, you can always text in. What's the number for text in, Emily?
It is 855-723-9010.
Oh, you did that good. I'm glad I faked like I didn't know the answer.
That's why I'm here.
Oh, yeah.
For you to fake that you don't know it.
Sometimes I really don't know it, though. And I'll usually admit if I did fake it. So, I'm going to leave that one alone. Okay, so where are we going next?
We went a little bit around from France to everywhere else. I guess not even.
Yeah.
And now we're going to go to Britain because I wanted to
the pond, if you will.
Across the pond.
Cheerio.
Hello.
A spot of tea, then.
I've been living there for 4 years and I still can barely do a British accent.
Oh, that was like horrible, but not bad.
Would you like a cup of tea? Okay, now I feel like I've disrespected the place I've been living.
You sounded a bit like the Queen there. That was nice.
To get my corgis out.
I felt royal sitting in your presence at that moment.
We'll get some tea later.
John Cousins, if you're listening, we're sorry. Okay, so we're going across the pond. We're going to talk about the Million Mask March.
Yes.
Is that right?
This is a march that happens every November 5th around the world. And so...
The whole world?
Yeah, pretty much.
Whoa, okay.
And so Anonymous is a online... How would you say?
Website?
No, it's not a website. It's a bunch of hackers. They're called protest hackers.
Hacktivists?
Hacktivists, that was the word.
I love that word. It's great.
So we got some hacktivists who basically hack for the better of the people. And that they've ranged from, I don't know, like animal cruelty to like documents themselves to scandals of people to well, they released during the time of Trump a list of people from the KKK, their Facebook pages,
Wow.
Some pretty intense stuff that they do. You can like it or you can hate it.
Do I have to choose right now? Can you tell me a little more first?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So basically, at least in Britain, they associate the day November 5th with Guy Fawkes Day, which is a day where it's also called Bonfire Day, where they light a big bonfire in like memorial of this guy who...
Guy Fawkes? Is that the guy?
Yeah, that's him.
Yeah, that was good, right?
You did it.
I was listening.
And he basically tried to blow up Parliament in London.
Oh. That big building that's like attached to Big Ben and all that? Yeah. Okay. Sometimes people call me Big Ben.
Big Ben.
Just because I'm tall.
I'll start calling you Big Ben.
Oh, please don't. Or, I mean, I guess not on the air. I don't know. Whatever.
All right, Big Ben.
Do what you want. Do what you want, Emily.
So, basically, they have around this time, so you have two different associations of that day. You have people which is a really funny holiday in my perspective, because this guy tried to blow up Parliament, and in remembrance of that
and now
day,
you got a holiday?
They have a holiday where you go out and make a big campfire, what they call a bonfire. Yeah. So
wow, this reminds me of a famous piece of art. I believe it's called Parliament Burning.
I'm sure that's where it comes from.
Yeah. Wow. I wish I remembered my art appreciation class more. I just remember flirting with the blonde sitting next to me.
Oh, Ben.
Oh, man.
All you remember is the blonde, art.
I miss all the art now. Dang. I'm so much older now. I don't even care about blondes, and that's still all I remember, right? What are you going to do?
Okay.
I'm only human.
Well,
okay.
Only
Parliament
human.
burning.
Yes.
Go.
So Guy Fawkes is also, because you probably know from V from Vendetta, that mask.
Oh, yeah.
So
That's
everyone wears that mask at these marches, especially for just like hiding your facial features to facial recognition cameras. So people will wear masks. They'll wear.
Are people being persecuted that attend this?
Yes. Well, actually, they will themselves, like, okay, so one of the newer laws that was passed, I believe, or not law, I guess protesting regulations that they passed 2 years ago, was that, because before it was completely fine for them to wear the mask.
Sure.
And now they can't in the like main march area. And
There's
that is
something kind of scary about wearing a mask, isn't there?
Well, the whole point is so that no one knows who you are. You don't want to be associated with something that could be bad. So
yeah,
because the thing is, the way that this march is portrayed to the greater population is that they're writers, they're anarchists, anti-establishment, they hate capitalism, they are really just anarchy.
Okay.
Not everyone from the group, you can't say that everyone is, but the main message, it kind of flows out in that way. And typically there are like people will go into stores, loot, they'll smash windows. The first year I went, which was 2015. Yes, 2015. There was a cop car that was burnt down. And there's basically, when this is reported in the news, all that is reported is the violence. Like, you don't get any perspective from why people are actually protesting. So
that's sort of the degradation of news, right?
In general, with protest riots, that's what you see.
Right. We've stopped getting this well-rounded vision of what actually is happening, and it becomes this one-sided, sort of skewed, almost propaganda trying to tell us what to think instead of informing us.
I've always found this really fascinating because when I first started studying journalism, I was told what was newsworthy. And
what qualifies as newsworthy?
Things that are scandalous. So numbers. So I will apply it to protests. The thing that's newsworthy is how many arrests, was anyone injured? Was there anything, like just anything bad that happened? That will be in your headline.
So it's never who's the philanthropist?
No.
Who did they help?
The sad thing.
What's the kind, heartwarming story for the day?
Yeah.
That's not newsworthy.
Well, that's why the news
Puppies
is probably,
and kittens.
No. I mean, that's why the news is typically, I would say, judged or like criticized because they focus on the bad, not the good. But if you read the story, you'll kind of get a little bit more of the good. But typically it's focusing on what was the biggest thing that happened. And that is typically arrest, things like property destruction, what's happened. So that's one of the reasons why this march itself is typically viewed in a negative light.
Also, people look really scary with those masks.
Oh, they do. Yeah.
And, it's like the anonymity from a mask is scary. Because when someone has a mask on, I think they're more willing to do things that they wouldn't do before.
Yeah.
And they're more willing to take risks or hurt someone else because they think they're anonymous. I mean, think of the KKK, right? It's like they put on masks
white hoods,
and now they get to act and do things that they wouldn't normally do.
Which is definitely what happens to an extent. Like people are setting off fireworks, just like, I don't know, like smoke bombs.
Sure.
And as well at that protest itself, the England uses a lot of police horses.
Okay.
And with the loud
Which are
noises,
super cool, right?
It's awesome, but it's in that context, it doesn't make sense because horses are frightened by loud noises.
Right.
Why would you put a horse in a place where there's a lot of loud noises?
Right.
And so there were actually a lot of horse injuries, which was reported.
People get trampled, and then there's like a news story there. But it's not, hey, everyone knows there's horses. Why are we using fireworks?
Yeah.
Right? That's the conversation we probably should have been having.
Yeah. Or at least turn it on that other side. The police know there's going to be fireworks because this happens every year.
So leave the horses
out.
Yeah. Let's get some horsepower instead of actual horses being our power, right?
Yeah. And so this piece I did, I kind of wanted in response to talk about, one, I wanted to critique the way that the news typically framed this, which was violent. Because when I went there, it wasn't violent. Like, there were groups of violence, but only like 20 people. I mean, I'm only making up a number, but it's so small compared to the actual majority that it's like I felt so bad if I were to report on just the bad. So I went around asking people, just why are you here today? This is like beginner Emily in journalism. I was like so scared.
Your origin story.
This is an origin story.
She's going to be a superhero, so every superhero needs an origin story.
All right. So with that intro, I'm going to play this, like, I basically put together some recordings of that protest.
Oh, great.
Let's get this running.
All right. I can't wait. Get your popcorn, folks. This is KZSU 90.1 Stanford.
I'm here against anti-censorship, which is being tried to bring in under the trade policy, which is being stopped by the EU. I'm also here against austerity. I'm against that which helps the 1% and hinders the 99%. I'm here for myself as a victim of this, and I'm here for everyone who can't be here, such as the severely disabled, for example.
So, why the Jesus outfit?
I like peace. I believe that for this to work, there needs to be peace on both sides. Only then a true negotiation can come to. Only then true views. Otherwise, there's going to be media going, oh, well, this was violence. For example, I was down there at the main push, where there's people trying to fight the police are trying to fight back, and no one started it, it just kind of happened. Someone got pushed into someone else, it kind of caused off. I was there just strolling, making sure that nobody was going over the top, dragging the worst offenders away. I believe that there shouldn't be violence like that here. So that's why there's the Jesus outfit. Yeah. I think by having one icon which can stand up, which isn't a celebrity, which is just a regular guy.
It's a good juxtaposition.
Yeah. So I believe that is a more powerful way than having someone like Brand going, look guys, help the poor, but I'm rich. I don't believe that's why the Dalai Lama, for example, has lost his touch, because he's become rich off the fact he's the Dalai Lama. Now the people in his own country don't listen to him, whereas the Western world go, yeah, that guy. It doesn't work if you're trying to protect what you are not, then people won't listen to you. So, yeah.
I'm a public service worker and I've had my pension stolen from me, from the government. And as I say, it's about time people start standing up. The doctors, the firefighters, the nurses and even the police officers. We've all had our pensions stolen, our pays froze. And yeah, just need time to stand up. I just hope the more marches. We need the nurses, the teachers, every union to come together. And then hopefully something will start to get through. But I don't think this will do anything. But
we're demonstrating against the government and the measures that they put in to try and stop us having a voice. I am personally demonstrating against the House of Parliament hiding paedophiles behind their walls. There's such a big scandal in this country. If you're a member of Parliament, you seem to get away with any crime. You no longer have a voice if you're someone lower. They treat us like scum. They try and take away our voice. This is what they get.
Do you think it's going to make a difference?
Well, the police are out, aren't they? Police are everywhere. They're spending money. They're watching us and they're scared. I think that's the difference. The governments are realising that they can't keep doing this forever. The people are getting rowdy. We're out on the streets. We're protesting them. I think it will definitely make a difference. Just give it a bit of time.
How do you think the police have handled this so far? Do you think they have handled it in such a way that you wish they haven't?
So far they've been quite good.
Yeah.
There's no brutality, there's no idiocy. They're being quite friendly, being all right. As the night goes on, they tend to get a bit worse, but so far they've been doing all right.
All right.
Yeah, so this was your origin of starting to collect some sound bites.
Yeah.
For some interviews that you were doing in the streets. Mm-hmm. And do you have some takeaways of what you got out of those conversations?
So what I got most out of these conversations was that these people, like, the reason why they're there is completely legitimate. Like, the way that the news had framed it when I was doing research before was I was like, okay, are these people really crazy anarchists?
Yeah.
I was like, okay, how am I going to feel like about being here? I mean, trust me, I was extremely nervous, especially with the masks on everyone.
Were you wearing a mask?
I wasn't.
Oh, so you really didn't fit in, did you?
No. I had my my reporter bag and camera and notepad. You can tell I wasn't there.
You don't look like your average protester, you're saying?
No,
you didn't have the signaling of the strange.
But I was there out of just curiosity mostly.
Sure.
And going there, listening to these people's stories. I mean, it was very quick snippets because everyone's marching. And things were going off. I don't know if you could hear some people at one point, some guy was like yelling into the microphone because so much was going on outside.
I thought he was just enthusiastic.
Well, he was probably enthusiastic too. It sounded angry.
Yeah.
And actually, so the first guy, I probably shouldn't mention, but he was Jesus. He was like the anonymous Jesus. And he went around saying like, I wanted to show the peace of what we can bring to this protest.
Still wearing a mask?
Yes, still wearing the mask.
That's special.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I felt like really that the way that it was pictured or framed wasn't at all what I saw.
Sure.
And heard, especially.
Well, it's like you said, that's not the newsworthy part, right?
Which is the shame.
Although we seem to be
bit.
making it as newsworthy as we want it to be, but it's not what you're going to see in the mainstream news because it's not the things that grab attention, that shock and bewilder.
Exactly.
Right.
And another takeaway that I got from this was overall the police and how they dealt with the situation. Because I'm used to American police. And when you go there, like to Britain, the first thing you'll probably notice are their hats.
Oh,
they have like these little like tall round
like
hats.
Bucket hat kind of thing. Yeah.
And they're seriously the cutest things. And I see them and I'm just like, I am not intimidated by you at all. And like they don't carry guns.
Yeah.
Well, of course, because you can carry a gun in the UK, but you have to have a license, so it's not as widely available. And so the overall, like you can go up to a police officer and be like, what's going on? Can you tell me this quick? You ask them questions, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
They're like completely happy to talk to you and like just really nice. Like you see them, they're just standing there kind of like smiling. As well.
They're not wearing riot gear trying to intimidate?
They did at one point.
Okay.
Things did see a bit of a turn at one point. I was actually caught in what is called, I'm going to forget it. It's called a pot, something like that. A boiling pot.
Is that where you put your food to cook it?
It's where a little bit different.
Okay.
It's
I'm familiar with that.
The police will surround a group of protesters, a pretty big group because they feel like they're going off track.
Yeah.
And so they will take that group, surround them, and won't let them leave for about, it could range to any time.
Like a cooling off period?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I was there for probably about 10 minutes, and then they released us. The idea is actually to disperse the protesters, so then they're confused. So the momentum is lost.
Yeah.
And now they're like, oh, where did everyone else go? I guess I'll just go home. That's the hope.
Yeah. They did something similar in Times Square. For New Year's Eve 2000, they shut down each one of the blocks and sort of surrounded it by police and riot gear.
They do it for one big crowd control.
Yeah, exactly.
So overall, I was shocked by the way that the police handled the situation because I found it so relaxed.
Like kind and thoughtful almost?
Yeah.
Maybe.
To an extent. No, I wouldn't say kind and thoughtful.
Okay.
But at least like they weren't that like you shouldn't be here.
Right.
And I was at the end of that recording, it was of a guy who was saying, I felt like the police were fine. And a majority of the people I was talking to, they were like, oh, the police have been fine. Everything's been fine.
Wow.
But I did get an interview of someone saying, oh, I hate the police,
Well, there's always one, right?
So that as well was kind of rooting from that anarchist ideology, for sure.
Sure.
So I found that instance really interesting to put in perspective from contrasting to France, to Britain. Like, obviously, I can't say this for all protests. Like, one time I went to a protest in Britain, and it was just a group of people sitting around. It was very spiritual, where, like, they had every element, and, like, you burnt a piece of paper, and you, like, sang a song. And
was the song Kumbaya?
you like shook your body like a.
Wow, that does sound very interesting.
It was really interesting.
I wonder if they created social change with that.
I don't know.
I hate to laugh. I don't want to look down on anybody's beliefs or the way they do things. And
well,
it can,
I hope
it can
at least
seem,
put something out there. You might
sure,
get something back.
Sure, yeah. And it can always seem strange to look from the outside and see people doing things that you don't understand.
Well, that's why I like going to these things, because at the time of university, I was really interested in social movements and how they worked, especially because I had that big contrast. And it's funny because it still feels like, okay, you have Britain and the US. They don't seem that different, but they are incredibly, like, you can't even compare. To an extent. Like,
sure.
I kind of came in thinking, no, they're pretty much the same. Nope.
I mean, there's places in the U.S. that I think feel like a foreign country.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm pretty sure we speak different languages, too. And they're both English.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think, even to generalize the U.S. and U.K. being different is sort of still not fine-grained enough to really recognize how much diversity there is within a town, within a household.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we're all so different, and we have so many various needs and ways of what we view as, fair or just. And it's not a straightforward thing to just say what is fair. And it's especially problematic, which is a funny thing for me to say about this. But when we try to go to other countries and impose things like democracy, because we have no right to do that, and we don't understand the world that we're trying to change. So we really should do that first, right? Understanding before action is generally a good process.
Well, democracy is a Western, like, philosophy, you could say, or ideology.
Right.
And you don't, like, if you're not looking at Eastern philosophy, understanding structures, like, you're not getting a picture that's complete.
Right.
Or like from any other region.
It's true. And on that note, we're going to sign off for the hour. This is Ben Woodford.
With Emily.
And we are here for the Modern Education Radio Hour, Fridays from 3 to 4 p.m. on 90.1 FM, KZSU.